The stranger's eyes locked onto mine across the crowded art gallery, and for a moment, the champagne glass in my hand trembled as his expression shifted from casual interest to something close to shock. "You have my mother's eyes," he said quietly when he finally crossed the room to stand before me, his voice carrying an emotion I could not place. His stare was so intense that I felt myself take an involuntary step backward, my shoulders pressing against the cream-colored wall behind me. "I'm sorry," I managed, confused by both his words and the way he seemed unable to look away from my face. He blinked as if coming back to himself and extended his hand. "Forgive me. That was incredibly forward. I'm Alexander Harrington." I shook his hand, feeling the warmth and firmness of his grip. "Emma Clarke, and I think you might have me confused with someone else." "No confusion," he said, still staring, his dark eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "It's just remarkable. The color, the shape, even the way you look at things. I'm sorry. I know I'm making you uncomfortable." He was right about that. Alexander Harrington was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly tousled in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of confidence and power. But it was his eyes that held me, the way they kept returning to mine as if he was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. "Your mother must be a lovely woman," I said, attempting to lighten the mood. His expression faltered, a shadow crossing his features. "She was. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate but genuine. I knew the weight of that kind of loss, having buried my own father just 18 months prior. "Thank you." He seemed to shake himself from his thoughts. "Are you here for the exhibition, or do you work here?" "I'm one of the artists, actually," I said, gesturing to the painting beside me. It was a landscape of the coast, all turbulent waves and dramatic skies, painted in oils that had taken me 3 months to complete. Alexander turned to study it, and I watched his profile as he took in the details. There was something classical about his features, strong jaw and straight nose, but it was the gentleness in his expression as he examined my work that surprised me. "This is extraordinary," he said after a long moment. "The way you have captured the light breaking through the storm clouds, it reminds me of the Turner paintings at the National Gallery." I felt a flush of pleasure at the comparison. That's high praise. Turner is one of my inspirations. It shows. He leaned closer to examine the brushwork. "How long have you been painting?" "Since I was 7. My father was an art teacher. He's the one who taught me to see light and shadow, to understand how colors interact." I felt the familiar ache in my chest at the mention of him. Alexander looked back at me, and again I saw that strange intensity in his gaze. "He taught you well. Your technique is flawless, but more than that, there's emotion in this piece. You can feel the power of the storm, but also the promise that it will pass." We talked for another hour, standing in that gallery surrounded by my paintings and those of other local artists. Alexander asked thoughtful questions about my process, my inspiration, my struggles with certain techniques. He listened with complete attention, as if every word I spoke mattered. But through it all, I could not shake the feeling of being studied, of those dark eyes returning again and again to my face. "I need to be honest with you," he said finally, glancing at his watch. "I came here tonight specifically to look at your work." My eyebrows rose. "You did?" "I saw a feature about this exhibition in the arts section of the paper. Your coastal piece was prominently displayed. I collect art, and I thought it might be something I would want to purchase." He paused, his gaze intense. "Now that I have seen it in person, I would like to buy it, and 3 others if you are willing to sell them." I stared at him, my mind racing. That's very generous, but those 4 pieces together would be nearly £60,000. I'm aware. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. My assistant will contact you tomorrow to arrange payment and delivery. But Emma, I want you to know that I'm not buying them out of pity or as some kind of charity. Your work is genuinely exceptional. I looked down at the card in my hand. The embossed lettering read, Alexander Harrington, CEO, Harrington Properties Limited. My stomach did a small flip. Harrington Properties was one of the largest real estate development companies in the country. I had seen their name on buildings throughout London, on the glossy advertisements for luxury apartment complexes and commercial developments. You're that Alexander Harrington, I said, feeling foolish for not recognizing him immediately. I prefer to think of myself as just Alexander. There was a hint of a smile on his lips, but his eyes remained serious. May I ask you something personal? I nodded, still processing the fact that I was speaking with a man whose net worth was probably in the hundreds of millions. Your parents, are you adopted? The question caught me off guard. No, I don't think so. My father never mentioned anything like that, and I look quite a bit like him. Same nose, same chin. And your mother, she died when I was born, complications during delivery. It was a fact I had lived with my entire life, the knowledge that my existence had come at the cost of hers. Something flickered across Alexander's face, an emotion I could not quite identify. I see. I apologize for the intrusive questions. It's just that the resemblance is so striking. To your mother, yes. He seemed about to say more, then stopped himself. I should let you get back to your guests, but I meant what I said about your paintings. My assistant, Margaret, will call you tomorrow. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. Emma, would you consider having dinner with me? Not as a collector and artist, but as 2 people who might enjoy getting to know each other better. My heart stuttered in my chest. I would like that. Tomorrow evening. I can pick you up at 7. Tomorrow is perfect. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious features into something warmer, more approachable. I look forward to it. And Emma, I really am sorry for staring. It's just that sometimes the past reaches out and catches you when you least expect it. After he left, I stood alone in the gallery, his business card still in my hand, wondering what he had meant by those words. The gallery owner, Patricia, appeared at my elbow with a knowing smile. You have any idea who that was? She asked. Alexander Harrington, apparently. One of the most eligible bachelors in London, according to the gossip magazines. Also one of the most reclusive. He's known for his business acumen, not his social life. The fact that he spent an hour talking to you is going to be all over the arts community by tomorrow. I looked toward the door where he had disappeared. He said I have his mother's eyes. Patricia's smile faded. Catherine Harrington. She died about 3 years ago, cancer, I believe. She was quite involved in the arts community, actually. Sat on the board of several museums and galleries. Beautiful woman. Do you have any pictures of her? I might have something in my files. She attended a few events here over the years. Patricia disappeared into her office and returned a few minutes later with her tablet. She scrolled through several photos before stopping on one. Here. This was from a charity auction 5 years ago. I looked at the image and felt my breath catch. Catherine Harrington had been lovely, with an elegant smile and graceful posture. But it was her eyes that made me stare. They were the same unusual shade of green as mine, a color somewhere between emerald and jade, flecked with gold near the pupils. The shape was similar too, slightly upturned at the outer corners with long dark lashes. That's uncanny, Patricia murmured, looking from the photo to my face. Just a coincidence, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to my own ears. That night, I lay awake in my small flat in Islington, thinking about Alexander Harrington and his mother's eyes. I thought about the way he had looked at me, as if I was a ghost from his past. I thought about his questions regarding my parents, about adoption. My father had never mentioned anything about my mother being adopted, but then again, we had not spoken much about her. The topic had always been too painful for him, the loss of his young wife too raw even decades later. I got up and pulled down the box of family photos from the top of my closet. There were not many. My father had not been sentimental about pictures, preferring to live in the present rather than dwell on the past. But there were a few from his wedding, and I examined them closely in the lamplight. My mother had been young and pretty, with dark hair and a bright smile. She wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. In every photo, she gazed at my father with unmistakable love. I studied her features, trying to see myself in them. The shape of her face was different from mine, more oval where mine was heart-shaped. Her nose was smaller, more delicate. But her eyes, even in these faded photographs, looked strikingly familiar. I put the photos away and tried to sleep, but my mind would not quiet. What were the chances that I would have the same distinctive eyes as Catherine Harrington? And why did Alexander seem so affected by the resemblance? The next morning, Margaret called precisely at 9 o'clock. She was efficient and professional, arranging for payment and for a courier to collect the paintings later in the week. She also confirmed my dinner plans with Alexander, providing me with his personal mobile number in case anything changed. Mr. Harrington asked me to tell you that the dress code is smart casual, she said. He's made reservations at a small French restaurant in Notting Hill, nothing too formal. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on my work. I had a commission to complete, a portrait of a young girl for her parents' anniversary, but my mind kept wandering. I found myself painting eyes, green eyes flecked with gold, over and over on my practice canvas. At 6 o'clock, I began getting ready. I chose a deep blue dress that my friend Sarah had convinced me to buy months ago, insisting that it brought out my eyes. I left my dark hair down in loose waves and kept my makeup simple. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself. Just Emma Clarke, the struggling artist who made rent by teaching painting classes to children on weekends. But I also saw something else now, something I had never questioned before. I saw my eyes and wondered who else might have looked out through them. Alexander arrived exactly at 7, dressed in dark jeans and a navy sweater that made him look less like a powerful CEO and more like a man you might meet at a pub. He smiled when I opened the door, and I saw him make a visible effort not to stare. "You look beautiful," he said, offering me his arm. His car was a sleek black Audi, expensive but not ostentatious. As we drove through the London streets toward Notting Hill, we talked about neutral topics. The weather, the traffic, the recent restoration work at St. Paul's Cathedral. But I could feel the weight of unasked questions between us, the things we both wanted to know but were too polite to demand. The restaurant was small and intimate, tucked away on a quiet side street. The owner greeted Alexander by name and led us to a secluded table near the back. Once we had ordered wine and studied the menu, Alexander leaned back in his chair and regarded me with that same intense focus from the night before. "I need to apologize again for my behavior yesterday," he said. "I made you uncomfortable, and that was not my intention." "You were grieving," I said gently. "I understand that seeing someone who reminds you of your mother must have been startling. It was more than startling. It was like looking at a ghost." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "My mother and I were very close. After my father died when I was 15, it was just the two of us. She built the company from almost nothing, taught me everything I know about business and life. When she got sick, I watched her fight with everything she had, but in the end, it was not enough. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it deeply. "Losing a parent is one of the hardest things we go through. You said your father passed recently, 18 months ago. Heart attack. He was only 62. The grief still felt fresh, the absence still a daily ache. He was my world. After my mother died, he raised me alone, never remarried. He poured all his love and energy into teaching and into me." "What was his name?" "Richard Clarke. He taught art at a comprehensive school in Hertfordshire for 30 years. Alexander pulled out his phone and tapped something into it. His brow furrowed as he read whatever appeared on the screen. "What is it?" I asked. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. I'm just looking up something." He was quiet for a moment, then set his phone down and looked at me with an expression I could not decipher. "Emma, did your father ever live in Edinburgh?" "Yes, actually. He went to university there at the College of Art. That's where he met my mother." "Why?" "My mother was from Edinburgh. She lived there until she was 25, then moved to London." Alexander's voice was careful, measured. "Emma, I know this is going to sound crazy, but would you be willing to do a DNA test?" I stared at him, my wine glass frozen halfway to my lips. "A DNA test? Why?" "Because my mother had a baby when she was very young, barely 19, a baby girl she gave up for adoption." The words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back and could no longer contain them. "She never told anyone except me, and only after she knew she was dying. She said it was her greatest regret, the daughter she had given away because she was too young and too poor to raise a child alone." The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, the air too thick. "You think I'm her daughter?" "I think it's possible, more than possible." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "The eyes are the first thing, yes, but there's more. My mother was an artist before she became a businesswoman. She painted constantly when I was growing up, mostly landscapes and seascapes. She had your same style, the same attention to light and emotion." "Lots of people paint landscapes," I said, but my voice sounded weak. "I know. And maybe this is all just a desperate wish on my part, a grieving son seeing connections that are not there. But Emma, my mother told me that she gave birth in Edinburgh in April of 1991. She said she named the baby Grace before she handed her over to the adoption agency. She said the father was a young art student named Richard." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself. "My father's name was Richard. I was born in April of 1991. But I was not adopted. My father would have told me." "Would he have? If your mother, the woman who gave birth to you, asked him to raise you as his own, to never tell you the truth, would he have kept that promise?" I thought about my father, about his steadfast loyalty, about the way he had never spoken about my mother's family or shown me pictures of them. I thought about how I had never met any of my mother's relatives, how my father had always said she was an only child whose parents had died young. I thought about all the times I had asked questions and received vague, uncomfortable answers. "I need to think," I said, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, this is too much." Alexander stood as well, concern etched on his face. "Of course. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have dumped all of this on you during dinner. Let me drive you home." "No, I think I need to walk to clear my head." "Emma, please, it's getting dark and you're upset. Let me at least call you a car." I wanted to argue, but the truth was that my legs felt shaky and my mind was reeling. I nodded, and Alexander spoke quietly to the restaurant owner, who called a taxi for me. As I waited by the door, Alexander approached me carefully, as if I might bolt at any moment. "I know this is overwhelming. But Emma, if there's even a chance that you are my sister, don't you want to know? Don't you want to understand where you came from, sister?" The word hung in the air between us, changing everything. If what he was suggesting was true, then the man I had been attracted to, the man whose intense gaze had made my heart race, was not a potential romantic interest but my half-brother. "I don't know what I want," I said honestly. "I need time to process this." "Take all the time you need. But please, think about the DNA test. We could know for certain within a few weeks." The taxi arrived and I fled into it, giving the driver my address in a voice that did not sound like my own. As we pulled away, I looked back and saw Alexander standing on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, watching me go with an expression of such hope and longing that it made my chest ache. At home, I pulled out the box of photos again and looked at them with new eyes. The woman I had always believed was my mother, the woman whose death I had mourned despite never knowing her, looked nothing like me. I had always attributed my features to some distant relative, some genetic lottery that had given me my particular combination of traits. But what if the truth was simpler and more complicated than that? What if Grace had been me, and Richard Clarke had adopted me as his own? I called Sarah, my oldest friend, and told her everything. She listened in silence until I finished, then let out a long breath. "That's insane," she said. "But also kind of makes sense. Emma, you have to admit you never really looked like either of your parents, and your dad was always so weird about your mum's family. He said they were all dead. What if that was just easier than explaining the truth?" I pressed my fingers against my temples, fighting off a headache. If this is true, if I am Catherine Harrington's daughter, then Alexander is my brother. "Half-brother," Sarah corrected. "And yeah, that definitely changes things, although it was only one date, right? It is not like you were in love with him." "No," I agreed, but even as I said it, I remembered the flutter in my stomach when he smiled, the warmth of his hand when we shook. I had felt something, the beginning of something, and now it was all twisted and wrong. "So you do the test," Sarah said practically. "You find out the truth. If he's your brother, then you just gained a family member, which is actually pretty great. If he's not, then you can go back to dating the hot millionaire." "He's a millionaire. Emma, the man owns half of London." "Yes, he's a millionaire, probably a billionaire." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my flat and thought about my father. I thought about the way he had raised me with such care and devotion. I thought about the times I had caught him looking at me with an expression of sadness, about the way he had kept my mother's memory alive through stories, but never through concrete details. I thought about how he had always told me I was his greatest gift, the best thing that had ever happened to him. Had he known he was raising another man's biological child? Or had he believed, as I had, that I was his daughter by blood as well as by love? I reached for my phone and texted Alexander, "I will do the test." His response came within seconds, "Thank you. I'll arrange everything tomorrow." 2 days later, a medical courier arrived at my flat with a DNA testing kit. The process was simple. A swab of my cheek, sealed in a sterile container, sent off to a laboratory. Alexander had already submitted his own sample. Now all we could do was wait. The waiting was torture. I tried to focus on my work, on the commission I needed to complete, but my mind kept wandering. I researched Catherine Harrington obsessively, reading every article, watching every interview. She had been remarkable, a woman who had built an empire through intelligence and determination. In the photos, I could see the resemblance Alexander had mentioned, not just in the eyes but in the shape of the smile, the way she tilted her head when considering something. I also researched Alexander, and found a man who had spent the last decade building on his mother's legacy, expanding Harrington properties into new markets, while maintaining a reputation for ethical business practices and quality developments. He kept his personal life private, but there were occasional photos of him at charity events or business functions, always alone or with business associates, never with a romantic partner. He called me 3 days after I had sent in the test. "I know we're supposed to be waiting for the results, but I was wondering if you would like to see some of my mother's paintings. I have them stored at my home. I thought it might help you feel more connected to her, regardless of what the DNA test shows." I agreed, and he picked me up that Saturday morning. His home turned out to be a stunning converted warehouse in Shoreditch, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. It was masculine and modern, but filled with art and books that softened the industrial edges. "This is beautiful," I said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. My mother helped me design it, actually. It was one of her last projects before she got sick. He led me to a large room at the back of the flat that had been converted into a storage and viewing space for art. Canvases lined the walls, and I caught my breath when I saw them. They were good, genuinely good. Catherine had painted coastal scenes, stormy skies and turbulent seas, all with the same attention to light and emotion that I tried to capture in my own work. But it was more than just the subject matter or technique. There was something in the way she saw the world, the particular colors she chose, the composition of each piece that felt eerily familiar. "It's like looking at my own thoughts," I whispered, moving from painting to painting. "I thought you would see it," Alexander said softly. "I knew from the moment I saw your work at the gallery. This is not just similar style or coincidence, Emma. This is genetics, the way artistic vision can pass from parent to child." I turned to face him, and for the first time, I looked at him not as a potential romantic interest, but as someone who might share my blood. He had the same determined set to his jaw that I saw in the mirror every morning. His hands, long-fingered and elegant, could have been mine. Even the way he stood, weight slightly forward as if always ready to move, was familiar. "How long until we get the results?" I asked. "Another week, maybe less." That week stretched like an eternity. Alexander and I spoke every day, sometimes for hours, learning about each other's lives. He told me about growing up in London, about business school and the pressure of taking over his mother's company. I told him about my childhood in Hertfordshire, about learning to paint in my father's classroom after school, about the struggle to make it as an artist in an expensive city. We did not talk about what would happen if the test was positive, or what it would mean for the attraction I had felt toward him that first night. We existed in a strange limbo, not quite strangers, not quite family, not quite anything we could define. The results came on a Thursday afternoon. Alexander called me, his voice shaking. "They're here. Can I come over?" "Yes." He arrived 20 minutes later, an envelope in his hand. We sat on my small sofa, the envelope between us, neither of us moving to open it. "Whatever it says, I'm glad I met you," Alexander said. "You've made me feel closer to my mother than I have since she died." "I feel the same," I admitted. "Even if I'm not her daughter, knowing about her has filled in something I did not know was missing." He opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. His eyes scanned the document, and I watched his face transform from nervous anticipation to pure joy. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking, "you're my sister. The probability of siblinghood is 99.97%. He pulled me into a hug, and I felt him shaking with emotion. I wrapped my arms around him and held on, feeling the same joy and also a deep sense of grief. I was mourning the mother I had never known I had, the life I might have lived if circumstances had been different. But I was also celebrating the brother I had gained, the connection to someone who understood the artistic drive that had always defined me. "She wanted to find you," Alexander said when we finally pulled apart, both of us wiping tears from our faces. In those last weeks, she kept talking about her daughter, about needing to see you before she died, but she did not have enough information. She did not know what name Richard had given you or where you had ended up. She searched, but she ran out of time. "Tell me about her," I said. "Tell me everything." We spent the rest of the afternoon and into the evening talking. Alexander showed me photos and videos on his phone, shared stories about Catherine's fierce intelligence, her wicked sense of humor, her unwavering support of his dreams. He told me about her last days, about how she had made him promise to keep looking for her daughter, to never stop trying to find her. "I was not actively searching," he admitted. "I did not know where to start, and part of me thought maybe it was better to let you live your life without disrupting it. But then I saw your painting in the paper, and I knew I had to meet you. Even before I was certain, I felt it." "What about my father?" I asked. "Did your mother ever mention him?" She said he was kind and talented, that she had loved him as much as a 19-year-old could love anyone. But she was pregnant and terrified, and her parents were threatening to disown her. She thought adoption was the only option. She gave birth to you in a private hospital, held you for an hour, and then handed you over to the agency. Alexander paused, choosing his words carefully. "She did not know that Richard had adopted you. She thought you went to a different family." I tried to imagine it. My young mother, barely more than a girl herself, making the impossible choice to give me away. My father, presumably devastated by the loss of the woman he loved, finding a way to keep her child, to raise me as his own. Had they planned it together? Had he convinced her? Or had he found out about me afterward and tracked down the adoption agency? "I need to go through my father's papers," I said. "There must be something, some documentation or explanation." Alexander offered to help, and together we drove to the storage unit where I had put my father's belongings after selling his house. It took us 3 hours of searching through boxes before we found it. A letter, yellowed with age, in a hand I did not recognize. "Dear Richard, I know you said you would do this, but I did not truly believe it until the papers were signed. You are taking Grace, our daughter, and raising her as your own. You are giving her the life I cannot give her, the love and stability she deserves. I am leaving for London tomorrow. My parents have disowned me, but I have a chance at a job, at building something for myself. I need to believe that I can become someone worthy of her, even if she never knows who I am. Please tell her that I loved her. Tell her that giving her up was the hardest thing I ever did. Tell her that not a day will go by that I do not think about her. And Richard, thank you. Thank you for loving us both enough to do this impossible thing. Catherine," I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Alexander stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, silent support. "He kept his promise," I said finally. "He never told me, but he kept her secret." "He loved you," Alexander said. "That's what matters." Over the next few weeks, Alexander and I built a relationship as siblings. We had dinner together twice a week, visited museums and galleries, and shared our work with each other. He introduced me to his world of business and property development, and I showed him the community of struggling artists I called friends. We were different in many ways, shaped by the different circumstances of our upbringings, but the fundamental connection was undeniable. But there was a complication I had not anticipated. The more time I spent with Alexander, the more I realized that my attraction to him had not disappeared. It was still there, buried under the knowledge of our siblingship, but persistent and confusing. I found myself noticing the way he smiled, the warmth of his hand when he helped me with my coat, the intensity of his gaze when he looked at my paintings. It was wrong, I told myself. He was my half-brother. These feelings were inappropriate and needed to be suppressed. Except that 3 months after we received the DNA results, Alexander called me late one evening, his voice urgent. "Emma, I need you to come over. I have found something and you need to see it immediately." I grabbed my keys and took a taxi to his flat, my mind racing with possibilities. What could he have discovered that could not wait until morning? He opened the door before I could knock, his hair disheveled, his eyes bright with emotion I could not name. "I've made a terrible mistake," he said without preamble. I mixed up the samples. I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean, the DNA test? I submitted my father's DNA, not mine." He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of agitation. "I found his testing kit in the drawer where I keep family documents. I was going through them tonight, looking for more information about my mother's past, and I found my own unused kit. Emma, we're not siblings." The world tilted on its axis. What? I sent in the wrong sample. My father had done a DNA test a few years before he died, something about tracing family ancestry. The kit was in our house, and I must have grabbed it by mistake when I was organizing the samples to send to the lab. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "You are Catherine's daughter." "But I am not her biological son." "I don't understand. Sit down, please." He led me to the sofa, his hand warm on my arm. "My mother told me the truth before she died, but I have been in denial about it. She said that she could not have children after complications from your birth. When she married my father 10 years later, they wanted a family, so they adopted me when I was 6 months old. She always said that I was hers in every way that mattered, and I believed her. I wanted to believe her so much that I have convinced myself I was her biological child." "But you said she told you about giving up a daughter." "She did. She told me everything in those final weeks. She told me about you, and she told me the truth about my own adoption. She said she needed me to know in case I ever found you, so that I would understand that biology matters less than love." He took my hands in his touch sending electricity through me. "Emma, I have been lying to myself for 3 months. I felt something for you that night at the gallery, something powerful and immediate. And then I convinced myself it was because we were siblings, because I was drawn to family. But it was not that at all. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest." "What was it?" "I was falling in love with you. I've been falling in love with you this whole time, and I have been fighting it because I thought we shared blood. But we do not. You are my mother's biological daughter, which makes you important to me, but we're not siblings." "I felt it too," I whispered. "That night at the gallery and every day since. I thought I was terrible for feeling attracted to my own brother. Not your brother." He moved closer, his face inches from mine. "Emma, I know this is complicated. I know we have built a relationship based on being family, and maybe that ruins everything. But I need you to know how I feel." I looked into his dark eyes, so different from my green ones, and saw the truth of his words reflected there. Alexander, who had been searching for his mother's lost daughter, who had found her and welcomed her with open arms, who had shown me a gentleness and understanding that I had not known I needed. He was not my brother. He was the man I had been falling in love with while thinking those feelings were forbidden. "Kiss me," I said. He did, and it was like coming home. His lips were soft and warm, and his hands cradled my face with such tenderness that I felt tears spring to my eyes. We kissed for a long time, making up for the 3 months of denial and confusion, of wanting and not allowing ourselves to want. "I'm still processing this," I said when we finally broke apart. "You're telling me that Catherine gave birth to me, then could not have more children, so she adopted you." "Yes, which means she got to be a mother after all, just not in the way she originally planned. and it means you and I are not related by blood at all. But we're still connected through her. We are. She brought us both into being in different ways. She gave you life, and she gave me a home and a family." He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle. "Is this too strange? Am I crazy for feeling this way?" "If you are crazy, then so am I." I kissed him again, longer this time, feeling the heat building between us. "I've wanted this for months." "So have I. Emma, I have been miserable, spending time with you and not being able to touch you like this, to hold you the way I wanted to." We spent the rest of the night talking and kissing, learning each other in this new context. Alexander told me more about his adoption, about his parents who had raised him with love and given him every opportunity. I told him about my childhood, about my father who had sacrificed everything to give me a stable, happy life. "They did this for us," I said as dawn began to break outside the windows. "Catherine and Richard, they both gave up parts of themselves to make sure we were loved and cared for." "They did," Alexander agreed. "And now we have a chance to build something together, something that honors their sacrifices." Our relationship developed quickly after that. We had already spent 3 months getting to know each other, building a foundation of friendship and trust. Adding romance to that base felt natural, right, like a missing piece clicking into place. Alexander was attentive and thoughtful, the kind of man who remembered small details and followed through on promises. He supported my art without trying to control it, offering resources and connections, but never pushing me to commercialize my work in ways that felt uncomfortable. He introduced me to gallery owners and collectors, yes, but he also sat with me in my studio and watched me paint, asking intelligent questions about my process and inspiration. I learned that beneath the powerful CEO exterior was a man who loved poetry and classical music, who volunteered at a youth center teaching business skills to teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds, who called his elderly neighbor every day to make sure she was well. He was kind and funny and occasionally stubborn, with a perfectionist streak that sometimes drove me crazy, but also ensured that everything he did was done with care and intention. 6 months after that night, when he told me the truth about our DNA test, Alexander took me to Edinburgh. We visited the hospital where Catherine had given birth to me, the art college where she and my father had met, the small flat where she had lived before her life changed forever. "This is where you began," Alexander said as we stood outside the building, now converted into modern apartments. "This is where 2 young people fell in love and created you." I leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, and thought about the strange and winding path that had led me to this moment. Catherine, who had given me life, then given me away so I could have a better one. Richard, who had loved her enough to raise her daughter as his own. And Alexander, the adopted son who had been searching for his mother's biological daughter only to fall in love with her instead. "You think they would approve?" I asked. "Your mother and my father, if they could see us now?" "I think they would be happy that we found each other, that something beautiful came from their difficult choices." That evening, Alexander took me to a small restaurant overlooking the water of Leith. We had a quiet dinner, talking about our plans for the future, about the gallery exhibition I had coming up, about the new property development Alexander was planning that would include affordable artist studios. After dessert, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I have spent the last year getting to know you, Emma Clarke. I have watched you paint and laugh and grieve and grow. I have seen your kindness and your talent and your strength, and I have fallen completely and irrevocably in love with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a stunning ring, a single emerald surrounded by diamonds. "The stone is the same color as your eyes, as my mother's eyes. Will you marry me? I could barely speak through my tears. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The ring slid onto my finger perfectly, and Alexander pulled me up and into his arms, kissing me as the other diners applauded. In that moment, surrounded by the city where my story had begun, I felt the past and present weaving together into something new and beautiful. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a gallery in London, surrounded by paintings from Catherine's collection and my own work hanging side by side. Sarah was my maid of honor, and Alexander's best friend James stood up for him. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, focused on the commitment we were making to each other and to the family we would build together. For our vows, I had painted Alexander a portrait, not of him or of me, but of his mother. I had worked from photographs, and from the paintings she had left behind, trying to capture not just her features but her essence, the strength and creativity that had defined her. When I unveiled it during the ceremony, Alexander wept. "She's here with us," he said, touching the canvas gently. "Thank you for giving her back to me." "She gave us to each other," I replied. "This is just me saying thank you." Our honeymoon was spent traveling along the British coast, visiting the locations that Catherine had painted and that I had painted, seeing the landscapes that had inspired us both. We stayed in small bed and breakfasts, walked along windswept beaches, and talked about the future we wanted to create together. "I want children," Alexander said one night as we lay in bed listening to the waves crash against the shore outside our window. "I want to give them the love and security that our parents gave us, the chance to grow up knowing exactly where they came from and how much they are wanted." "I want that too," I said, imagining a little girl with Alexander's dark eyes or a boy with my stubborn determination. "I want to fill our home with love and art and possibility." 2 years after our wedding, our daughter was born. We named her Catherine Grace, honoring both the woman who had given me life and the name she had originally given me. She had Alexander's dark hair and my green eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, we were both completely besotted. Alexander was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Catherine's care. He changed diapers and walked the floor with her at night, sang lullabies slightly off-key, and stared at her with the same intense focus he had once turned on me. Watching him with our daughter, I fell in love with him all over again. When Catherine was 2, we had a son, Richard Alexander. He was named for both of our fathers, the men who had shaped us into the people we had become. He was a happy, energetic child who seemed to find joy in everything, and he kept us constantly busy. I continued to paint, converting one of the rooms in Alexander's warehouse flat into a proper studio. My work evolved, becoming more personal, more focused on themes of family and connection. I had several successful exhibitions, and my paintings began to sell for significant amounts, though Alexander always insisted I should charge more. "You're not just selling paint on canvas," he would say. "You're selling emotion and vision and a piece of your soul. That has value." Alexander expanded Harrington properties, but he did it in a way that honored his mother's values, creating developments that included affordable housing and community spaces, supporting local artists and businesses. He established the Catherine Harrington Foundation, which provided grants and resources to young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them the opportunities his mother had fought so hard to create for herself. On what would have been Catherine's 70th birthday, we gathered at the gallery where Alexander and I had first met. We had organized an exhibition featuring Catherine's paintings alongside mine, showing the connection between our work and celebrating the artistic legacy she had left behind. The gallery was packed with artists and collectors, friends and family, all there to honor a remarkable woman. She would have loved this, Alexander said, his arm around my waist as we looked at the paintings covering the walls. Catherine held his hand on one side, and I held Richard on my hip. She would have loved meeting her grandchildren, I said, feeling the familiar ache of grief for the mother I had never known. She does know them in a way. They carry her forward, her creativity and her strength. He kissed my temple, just like you do. That night, after the children were asleep, and the excitement of the day had faded, Alexander and I stood in our living room surrounded by Catherine's paintings. We had hung them throughout the flat, constant reminders of the woman who had brought us together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not seen your painting in the paper?" Alexander asked. "If I had not come to that gallery?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are just meant to be." "I believe that. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were important. I thought it was because of my mother, because of the eyes, but it was more than that." "What was it?" "Recognition. My soul recognizing yours." He pulled me close and I melted into his embrace. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. You and our children, this life we have built together." "I feel the same way. You gave me a family, Alexander. You gave me a history and a future." We kissed, and in that moment I felt the presence of everyone who had made this possible. Catherine, who had made the hardest choice a mother could make. Richard, who had loved me enough to keep that secret. Alexander's adoptive parents, who had given him a home and raised him to be the man he was. All of them had played a part in bringing us to this place. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. We navigated the ups and downs of parenting, the demands of Alexander's business, the pressures of my increasingly successful career. We argued sometimes about money or time, or whose turn it was to handle school drop-off. But we always came back to the foundation of love and respect we had built. When Catherine was 7 and Richard was 5, we bought a house on the coast, a rambling old place with room for a proper studio and space for the children to run wild. I painted the views from our windows, the ever-changing moods of the sea, the light playing across the water. Alexander commuted to London during the week but spent weekends with us, and slowly he began to shift his work so that he could operate more remotely. "Life is too short to miss watching our children grow up," he said. My mother taught me that, even if I did not fully understand the lesson until now. We hosted regular gatherings at the beach house, filling it with friends and laughter and the smell of good food. The children grew up surrounded by art and love, knowing the story of how their parents had met, understanding the complex web of choices and sacrifices that had led to their existence. On our 10th wedding anniversary, Alexander surprised me with a trip back to Edinburgh. We visited all the places we had seen on our first trip, but we also went to the adoption agency where Catherine had left me all those years ago. The building had changed hands several times and was now a community center, but the receptionist let us in to look around. "This is where my mother said goodbye to me," I said, standing in what had once been a waiting room. "She sat here, 19 years old and terrified, and made the choice that led to everything." "She was incredibly brave," Alexander said, "braver than most people ever have to be." So was Richard, taking on a baby that was not biologically his, raising me as his own. Love makes us brave. You have shown me that every day for the last 11 years. That night, in our hotel room overlooking the castle, Alexander gave me his anniversary gift. It was a leather-bound journal, and inside the front cover he had written a dedication to Emma, the woman with my mother's eyes, who taught me that family is not just about blood but about choice and commitment. "Thank you for choosing me every single day. All my love always, Alexander." I want you to fill this with your thoughts, he said. Your memories and dreams, your observations about art and life. I want our children to have something from you, the way we have my mother's paintings, so they can understand who you were and what you believed. I started crying, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It's perfect. Thank you. We made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies and hearts so completely that words were unnecessary. Afterward, lying in his arms, I thought about the journey we had taken together, about the twist of fate that had brought us together in the first place. You remember that first night at the gallery? I asked. When you said I had your mother's eyes. I remember everything about that night. The blue dress you wore, the way you stood next to your painting, the moment I realized I was looking at my mother's daughter. Did you know then that you would fall in love with me? No. Then I thought you were my sister, remember? He laughed softly. But I knew you were going to be important in my life. I felt it the way you feel the weather changing, that instinctive knowledge that nothing will be the same. You changed everything for me. You gave me a mother I had never known, a history I had never understood. But more than that, you gave me yourself. We gave each other something neither of us was looking for but both of us needed. Time continued its steady march. Catherine grew into a talented artist in her own right. Her style, a unique blend of my focus on landscapes and her grandmother's emotional intensity. Richard discovered a passion for architecture and urban planning, inspired by his father's work, but driven to make cities more sustainable and equitable. We watched them grow and change, celebrated their successes, and supported them through their failures. We aged together, gracefully, Alexander's dark hair turning silver at the temples, my own dark strands gaining threads of gray. But our love only deepened, refined by years of partnership and shared experience. On our 25th wedding anniversary, our children threw us a surprise party at the gallery where we had met. They had curated an exhibition of 3 generations of art: Alexander Harrington's coastal scenes, my own evolved landscapes, and young Catherine's bold new interpretations. The walls told the story of our family through paint and canvas, a visual representation of legacy and love. You did all of this, I asked, looking at Catherine and Richard with pride. We wanted to honor what you built, Catherine said. Not just your marriage, but the family that came from such an unusual beginning. We wanted to show how love can transcend biology, Richard added. How the choices people make can echo forward through generations. Alexander pulled me close, and we stood together looking at the paintings that represented our shared history. Your grandmother would be so proud, he told our children, both of you and everything you have become. That night, after the party had ended and the guests had gone home, Alexander and I walked along the Thames, hand in hand the way we had so many times over the years. The city lights reflected on the water, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. 25 years, I said. A quarter of a century. Best 25 years of my life, not counting the year before when I was falling in love with you while thinking I could not have you, I laughed. That was a complicated time, but it led us here. Emma, if I could go back and change anything, I would not. Every moment, even the difficult ones, brought us to this. I feel the same way. You are my home, Alexander. You and our children, the life we have built. He stopped walking and turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but every year with you has made me love you more deeply. I love you too, with everything I am. We kissed there on the bridge, the city moving around us. 2 people who had found each other through an impossible series of circumstances and built something beautiful from it. Years later, When Alexander and I were in our 60s and our grandchildren were running through the beach house the way our children once had, I finally finished the journal he had given me on our 10th anniversary. I filled it with stories about our life together, about the love that had sustained us, about the family we had created from loss and longing. On the last page I wrote, "To whoever reads this in the future, love is the greatest force in the universe. It transcends biology and time and circumstance. It makes the impossible possible and the unbearable bearable. Catherine gave me life but gave me away so I could have a better one. Richard raised me as his own, never telling me the truth but showing me every day what love looks like. Alexander found me by accident and loved me on purpose. Together, we built a family not just from blood but from choice and commitment. Remember that. Remember that family is what you make it, and love is always, always worth the risk." Alexander read it with tears in his eyes, then pulled me into his arms. "You have given me the most extraordinary life," he said. "Thank you for being my partner in all of this. Thank you for seeing me that night at the gallery. Thank you for having your mother's eyes." He laughed. "I do not have her eyes, you do. But you have her heart, and you gave both to me." We grew old together in that house by the sea, surrounded by paintings and grandchildren and the evidence of a life well lived. We watched sunrises and sunsets, painted together in my studio, took long walks along the beach. We argued occasionally about silly things and made up quickly, aware that time was precious and not to be wasted on grudges. Alexander's business eventually passed to Richard, who took it in new and innovative directions while honoring the foundation Catherine and Alexander had built. Young Catherine became a renowned artist, her work displayed in galleries around the world. Both of them married and had children of their own, filling our lives with even more love. On what would be our 50th wedding anniversary, we renewed our vows on the beach in front of our house. We were older now, our bodies marked by time, but our love was as strong as ever. Our children and grandchildren gathered around us, 3 generations born from impossible choices and unexpected connections. 50 years ago, I married the woman I love," Alexander said, his voice still strong despite his age. "The woman with my mother's eyes who walked into my life and changed everything. Emma, you are my heart, my home, my greatest adventure. I choose you today just as I chose you then, and I will choose you every day for whatever time we have left. Alexander, you gave me a family when I thought I had lost mine," I said, holding his hands and looking into his eyes. "You loved me through confusion and grief and joy. You have been my partner, my support, my love. I choose you today and always." We kissed as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Our family applauded, and our grandchildren cheered, and I felt the presence of everyone who had made this moment possible. Catherine, looking down with her green eyes and satisfied smile. Richard, proud of the daughter he had raised. Alexander's adoptive parents, happy their son had found such love. Later that night, lying in bed with Alexander's arms around me, I thought about the question he had asked me years ago. What if he had not seen my painting in the paper? What if we had never met? But we had met. Against all odds, through an impossible series of coincidences and choices made by people we had never known, we had found each other. And from that meeting, we had built something that would last long after we were gone, a legacy of love that would echo through our children and grandchildren and beyond. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander murmured, his breath warm against my neck. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are. How everything had to happen exactly as it did for us to end up here. Not luck, fate. We were always meant to find each other. Do you really believe that?" "I do. I believe my mother gave you life. then gave you away, so that 34 years later I could find you in a gallery and fall in love with you. I believe every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of pain and joy led us to each other. That's a beautiful way to see it. It's the only way to see it. We are exactly where we are supposed to be, Emma, together. I turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who had been my friend, my partner, my love for more than half my life. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore in their eternal rhythm. And inside, we held each other close, grateful for every moment we had been given. The story that had begun with "You have my mother's eyes" had become our story, a tale of love found in the most unexpected place, built on a foundation of sacrifice and choice, sustained by commitment and devotion. It was not the story either of us had expected to live, but it was ours, and it was beautiful. As I drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Alexander's embrace, I thought about the young version of myself who had walked into that gallery all those years ago. She had no idea that the man who would stare at her with such intensity would become her everything. She could not have imagined the family she would build, the love she would know, the life she would create. But Catherine had known somehow. Catherine, who had made the hardest choice, had given me life and given me away, trusting that somehow, someway, it would all work out. And it had. It had worked out better than anyone could have dreamed. We had found each other, Alexander and I, two people connected by the brave choices of those who came before us. And we had built something lasting and true, something that would continue long after we were gone. That was the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that our love story would live on through our children and their children, a testament to the power of choice and commitment, of looking into someone's eyes and seeing not just a reflection but a future. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Alexander replied, "always and forever." And in that moment, surrounded by the family we had created and the legacy we had built, I knew with absolute certainty that every twist and turn of our journey had been worth it. The confusion, the grief, the unexpected revelations had all led us here, to this perfect moment of peace and love. We had found our happily ever after, Alexander and I. It was not the one we had expected, but it was ours, and it was everything.